This conference will now be recorded.
Wait, I screwed up. Hang on. The presenter view doesn't automatically come up anymore. I don't understand why, but whatever. All right, we'll start over.
Okay.
This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Red Short webinar. I'm Bill Schenkelberg, the Managing Director here at Red Sky Alliance. So putting on my previous federal service hat and putting it back on, I'll be briefly discussing the proposed U.S. federal regulations that will further govern commercial surveillance within the United States. So in the past 28 years with enforcing local, state, and federal laws, and then 20 years, navigating through the federal regulatory process, I've come to appreciate regulations and rules. Many believe that the U.S. is overregulated, and I tend to somewhat agree with that. So with these more strict and future rules regarding commercial surveillance, this could enact, let me start that over. So with these more strict future rules regarding commercial surveillance, they could very well be enacted with good intentions, by the regulators, yet they could stymie the free market and commercial sales. So before I jump into this topic, as always, you can find information on related topics at redskyalliance.org. Next slide. Every day we use our computers and smartphones. Social media platforms and companies selling commercial products on these platforms, they often collect user information and at times personal information, or what we'll call PII. Many don't even realize that this is occurring. Those that do are either indifferent to the collection, or some are very much against this collection. When purchasing products online, very personal information is known to be flying around the internet. End-to-end encryption has helped this a lot, yet the social media platforms and/or commercial collectors retain all this information that we're sending out there. Those who worry about this protection and the protection of their PII have to look somewhere for recourse and/or remedy, and well, that comes to our federal government. Commercial surveillance is the business of collecting, analyzing, and profiting from information about people. This bothers a lot of people, so enter the FTC. Next slide. Again, where would the US citizens go to ask for better protection regarding their personal and private information? Since the internet is automatically within the, quote, interstate commerce definition, interstate places the jurisdiction for regulation and enforcement to the US federal government. So in other words, anything that goes in between from state to state automatically falls to the federal government. So way back in the 1880s, the movement of goods was vastly expanding with the railroads. Railroads were connecting all the different states. And during this time in US history, most states in the US were connected via railroads and the ever expanding telegraph system. The problem with commerce was that each state had varying laws and regulations regarding the sale of products from one state to another. So to alleviate the then current, back in the 1800s, the then current lawsuits that were arguing between these various states and all the legal variances, the federal government stepped in to remove the state barriers and to promote the sale of products between states. The goal was to promote more commerce within our country. In 1887, the Interstate Commerce Commission was established, which over the next 100 years has since evolved into the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission is an independent agency of the United States government whose principal mission is the enforcement of civil antitrust laws and the promotion of consumer protection. So we'll call it the FTC. The FTC shares jurisdiction over federal civil antitrust enforcement with the U.S. Department of Justice and their antitrust division. The agency is obviously headquartered in Washington, D.C. Though the internet is basically a communication mode, which is actually governed by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission first established rules in 1965 for cable systems which received signals from microwave antennas. So that was the birth of the FCC. And not too long after that, the internet was being created through education, and then has evolved into what we have the internet today. And so today, people have learned that, well, we could sell products over the internet. And that's why the products that are bought and sold have jurisdiction under the Federal Trade Commission or the FTC. And that's what we're talking about today is the commercial surveillance. Consumer protection is the key word here. Through U.S. citizens, federal government representatives, people were requesting help to protect their PII, and is still being requested even to this day. And the mechanism is to go through your government representative, who then goes to the Federal Trade Commission, and that's where we set up these regulations and or rules. Next slide. So trusted cyber media sources are talking about the sharing of information that the FTC is seriously looking into stiffer regulations on commercial surveillance. The agency has been working behind the scenes to set the new proposed rules since back in August of 2022, when the FTC announced that it began seeking new ways to crack down on what it called at the time, quote, harmful commercial surveillance and lax data security. The current FTC's proposal on commercial surveillance, wait, let me start that over. Hold on one second, the dog is, I'll do this whole slide, hold on. Poor dog. Okay, I'll start this slide over. So trusted cyber media sources are reporting that the sharing that the FTC is looking in, wait, let me try that, that's not right. So trusted cyber media sources are reporting that the FTC is seriously looking into stiffer regulations on commercial surveillance. The agency has been working behind the scenes to set the new proposed rules since back in August of 2022, when the FTC announced that it began seeking new ways to crack down on what it called at the time, quote, harmful commercial surveillance and lax data security, end quote. The current FTC's proposed commercial surveillance rules would make a major shift in data privacy regulations. The FTC is currently clearing and creating clear guidelines for what companies can and can't do with the wow, getting tongue-tied. The current FTC's proposed commercial surveillance rules would mark a major shift in data privacy regulations. The FTC is currently creating clear guidelines for what companies can and can't do with the consumer data that they collect. This current push contrasts with the agency's current practice of relying on individual enforcement actions. So, hacks in the past several years of individuals' PII data has prompted the current debate. the trust in self-policing surveillance actions is really waning, and thus the federal government is stepping in to try and alleviate some of these issues. Next slide. As stated, commercial surveillance is the business of gathering, analyzing, and making money from individuals' personal data. Companies affected by the rule could include all of those using data in their businesses. So who's that? So just to name a few, banks, retailers, insurers, car manufacturers, as well as, tech giants that traffic in data, such as, Meta and Google. And these are just a few examples here of what the FTC is looking to better regulate with the collection of people's PII. When the FTC first announced it was investigating its new rules, it said in a press release that, quote, mass surveillance has heightened the risks and stakes of data breaches, deception, manipulation, and other abuses, end of quote. And in other words, hacking was on the rise and people were losing their PII and their data, and a lot of people were getting concerned with that. So these upcoming regulation changes are expected to stress the importance of data security and data minimization, which is really good, I think. But that means the business world will need to ensure proper handling of consumer data and limit their data collection to only what's necessary for its operation. It also suggests a focus on deleting the user's data once it's no longer needed for conducting business. So these last two items that I just mentioned, really, there's a wide interpretation of how long can you keep that information and how much of it can you collect. So it's up for interpretation, and it's going to be a sticky issue, I think, in the future. Next slide. The proposed rules also suggest an emphasis on I'm going to have a hard time with this. The proposed rules also suggest an emphasis on algorithmic accountability, which would require companies to face consequences for actions taken based on decisions by their created algorithms. This points to added consumer protections and safeguarding, people's civil rights against potential algorithmic errors. The FTC commissioner recently wrote about it. Right, let me start that over. Hold on one second. The dog's driving me nuts. Hold on. The FTC commissioner.
Wait. Now,
Okay.
start from the beginning of that slide. You kind of mangled required.
Okay. All right. I got to make sure I can say algorithmic. That's a tough one. Okay. The proposed rules also suggest an emphasis on algorithmic accountability, which would require companies to face consequences for actions taken based on decisions through their created algorithms. This points to added consumer protection, safeguarding civil rights against potential algorithmic errors. The FTC commissioner recently wrote about this, and she said, quote, data abuses such as surreptitious biometric or location tracking, unaccountable and discriminatory algorithmic decision making, or lax data security practices have either caused by, exasperated by, or are in service of nearly unfettered commercial data collection, retention, use, and sharing. So in other words, the FTC is very serious about looking into the misuse of collecting data through commercial surveillance, and it sounds to me that they're getting very serious about it, and thus these new regulations and rules are coming out from the federal government. Next slide. The FTC's seriousness additionally cited how computer app users conduct computer and internet usage. Quote, When they buy groceries, do homework, or apply for a car insurance, for example, consumers today likely give a wide range of personal information about themselves to companies, including their movements, prayers, friends, menstrual cycles, web browsing, and faces, among other basic aspects of their lives. End quote. So the question remains, how is this collection going to be used to sell products, and how much of individual civil rights may be violated? Let's take a quick look at this. So what is the regulatory process real quick here? Once the FTC has made a decision regarding, in this specific case, regarding commercial surveillance, it will issue a notice of public proposed rulemaking, and then it will hold public hearings to invite more public comment before formalizing the new rule. Even with the FTC's apparently moving forward on its current initiatives, their effort could be upended if the proposed U.S. congressional statute called the New American Privacy Act. Wait, let me start that over. Even with the FTC apparently moving forward on its current initiatives, their efforts could be upended if the proposed U.S. congressional statute called the New American Privacy Rights Act, or the APRA, passes in Congress. That federal legislation, still in draft form for now, includes language saying that it would end an FTC rule on commercial surveillance, which is 100% opposite of what the FTC is trying to do right now. So it's unclear if the APRA will gain traction in Congress when it's formally introduced, much less enacted. So you can see on the federal level that there's varying degrees of how they're going to handle this situation regarding commercial surveillance. And yes, this is the wheels of the U.S. federal legislative process, sometimes at odds with each other. So at this point, I'd say, stand by for any final ruling on either a regulation or a future statute coming out of Congress. But this is, it's not a clear-cut solution, and it's kind of a complex matter because, we're talking about the flow of commerce, and we're talking about regulation and possibly the stymieing of, sales and marketing with companies. But then again, we want to protect people's individual civil rights through the collection of PII, or personal identifying information. So just as a side note, I picked up on this that not everyone likes the FTC. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is labeling last week's FTC's publication and final rule on the non-compete clause, which is a total separate issue from what I was talking about, but it shows that there are agencies out there that don't like what the federal government's doing. And they're saying that their proposed actions are an unlawful power grab. The FTC claims their proposal will help usher in 8,500 extra new businesses and between 17 and 29,000 more patents each year. This all started last year when America's federal employment regulator, which is the FTC, said it was worried about the unequal bargaining power between employers and workers, claiming that the non-compete clause were limiting employees' ability to practice their trade. It asked for Americans' opinion and received more than 25,000 comments out of 26,000 that were in support of the ban. So in response, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is saying that it's going to sue the Federal Trade Commission for officially banning non-compete clauses in employment contracts across America. So the reason I'm bringing this up.
Say that over again.
Okay. In response, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is saying it is going to sue the Federal Trade Commission for officially banning non-compete clauses in employment contracts across America. A non-compete agreement typically blocks the employee who signs it from going to work for a rival or startup of a let me say that. A non-compete agreement typically blocks that employee who signs it from going to work for a rival or starting up a competing business of their own. So why am I bringing this up? I'm just bringing this up to show that there are entities out there in the private world in this case, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, that doesn't necessarily like, the regulations that are being set forth, this being the non-compete agreement. But there's also businesses out there that are going to fight the new and future regulations on commercial surveillance. So just because a regulation is enacted, it cannot be challenged. Wait a minute, I wrote that wrong. So just because a regulation is enacted by the federal government, it can be challenged in the courts, and oftentimes it does. So there's a lot going on within our federal government regarding commerce, which is a good thing and a bad thing, depending on what side of the issue you're looking at it. And in this case, we're talking about commercial surveillance. Next slide. So I'll wrap this up today, indicating that it's kind of a complex issue, and the topic of commercial surveillance, it's serious, and it's not going to go away in the eyes of interstate commerce and the U.S. federal government. And like I said before, there's debates on both sides as far as regulations, with the collection of people's personal identifying information, or how they travel, or all the algorithms that are out there that are collecting data on individual users, either through their computer or their now smartphones. So if you have any questions on this topic, you can always contact myself or Jim McKee, and both our contact information is on the screen. Or you can call us. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and we hope you tune in to our next Red Short webinar, which is next Wednesday, May 8th at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. See you all then.